All right, hi, my name is Jamie Wandel, and I'm here to walk you through how to draw composition. Rule of thumb would tell students 3 to 5 objects is a good number to have in a still life, at least for when you're starting out. You want to have an object's a variety of height, so some objects here that are taller, and then also some smaller objects like you can see down here. All right, so I think I definitely want to include Romeo. I also kind of like the height of this sort of coffee mocha pot thing here. I like that it's shiny. It reflects some of the colors I have below, so I kind of want to keep my scarf here to get some of the colors moving around so that it's overlapping. I like that shape right there, so I'm thinking about repetition of shape. I have some kind of round ellipses that I'm going to work with. I really wanted to keep this cute little guy in here. I may take the lid off or not. So I'm going to place, I do want to place this in here somewhere. And then one thing I like to do with students is sort of, if they're having trouble sort of moving the eye around the composition, one trick is to sort of use a string to sort of wrap your eye around the composition. So sometimes students would do that. And that will just naturally kind of lead my eye around, and then my eye sort of comes up to these green lines, so that I have my artificial green line and then my natural green lines in the vines of the plant, which is really nice. I'm going to move on to my next step, which is kind of drawing out my thumbnails. So I always have the students do at least 3 thumbnails and then go from there. So a lot of people would say, why not just do 1? You already have it set up, so you already know how it's going to look. But actually, even though I have arranged everything very carefully, there are still a lot of different options I could do. So this is where I'm going to use my Viewfinder, and this is actually just a mat. I use these. Some people have really viewfinders that are a lot smaller. I find that this is a useful size for me. So I'm just sort of coming in and deciding what is going to be in my view frame. So at this point you can see that I'm flipping it. I want to kind of figure out how I'm going to orient my picture. So, you know, I could orient like a landscape. I could go like portrait mode. So these are all decisions that you can kind of go through, but rather, you know, after I've kind of played around, I do sort of listen to myself and think, oh, I actually like the landscape mode. So I'm going to kind of go in and actually still use this to trace at least like, I'm just going to trace in my sketchbook 3. I've decided I kind of want landscape, but I'm going to do 1 portrait mode because you never know. I could change my mind once I have sketched it out. So I'm going to just do 3 thumbnails. They could be smaller than this. What is a thumbnail? Really, it's just sort of a quick sketch that maps out the composition. So I'm not really thinking about details at this point. The only thing I'm thinking about is like the size of the objects and where they are and how they are cropped or not. If I'm going to go in, and I do want to try out like different thumbnails. So if I'm going to go in here, I might think this is helpful to kind of hold your viewfinder in one hand until you're sort of used to cropping out everything. So I would kind of come in and I would say, okay, I have some cups down here, and then behind it is sort of the plant, but it overlaps, right? And I have the plant shape right here, and then this plant shape right here. And I'm just very loosely sort of sketching in the shapes. Here I have I sometimes make tick marks where the top of something is, where the bottom of something is. So this is my coffee pot. And then I sort of have this tick mark. Again, very loose shapes, because this is not my final drawing, this is just my thumbnail. That sort of ends there, and then I see this fabric coming out, I see this yarn, and I sort of have this little guy in here somewhere. So I'm just mapping out this little guy. And then I have these folds of fabric that are coming up over here. These are my cup handles, if that's not clear. And then I have a fold of fabric here, and it's sort of coming off the page. So I'm gonna crop that off the page. And this is sort of coming off the page too, no big deal. I can see the back of my fabric coming back here. And actually I can see the back of that table sort of coming a diagonal this way. So there would be my first thumbnail. And then I would go in and I'd say, okay, how can I do my second thumbnail? So I'm just gonna kind of shift a little bit, and you'll see how just shifting a little bit will change the whole entire composition. I'm looking at the cups are more centered here. They're still kind of at the bottom, but they're more centered here, and I'm seeing those handles come at me instead. So I have two cups right here. And then I have the top of my thing here. And then in this case, it's really just getting cut off. So the top is really pretty large, that big leaf right here, and then I have some smaller leaves right here. And I'm just gonna draw sort of heart shapes. And then my carafe or coffee mocha pot is back here somewhere. That's the spout, and then instead I barely see the edge of that. And I see the bottom coming here. And then I have this nice shape here. This short guy here, my yarn is behind there. And in this case, I have the fabric sort of coming off this way. And I have a wedge right here. And then the fabric would fold. So I don't have to include all of those details, but you get a much different sense of the composition already. So you start to be like, okay, maybe I prefer this after all, even though it was the one that I thought of second. It's a chance for me to actually choose instead of just going with the first one that I happen to think of. I've been using a pencil, just graphite, but I'm gonna kind of switch over to my graphite stick because sometimes when I'm doing my thumbnail, I like to work a little more loosely, and so that's also something to think about. Also, going into my final thumbnail, I'm just doing the portrait orientation. So kind of looking through my viewfinder. In this one, really, I have more foreground, unless I move it up. If I move it down the way that I like it, I have a lot more space up here, or down here in the foreground. And my cups are here. And then this coffee pot becomes the sort of centerpiece. And I sort of end up cropping out. And I can kind of line up you can kind of line up where things are too, because I'm getting a little bit off track looking. If I line up the height of the coffee pot really lines up with the leaf is actually a little higher than the height of that coffee pot. So I could end up doing that, and then the coffee pot is actually lower. So I would move that down just a little bit. And then the top of my cup sort of lines up with the top of this. So I would move that up just a little bit. And I'm making these little adjustments. And then I barely see over here, I barely see this green piece. So I don't even have to really draw that in. And this looks really messy to your eyes, but really it's just helping me sort of sort out in my mind what is going on here. So here's my lid. I have this leaf shape. And even though this is like, here's the bottom part of the fabric coming this way. And so just kind of doing these thumbnails, even though when I started off I said I wanted to go landscape, I actually think I ended up liking this composition better. So just going through the thumbnail process is really important, and figuring out what you like, how you want it to look. In this case, my plant's sort of cropped off here, and this side is sort of cropped off, but I do have a nice breathing room above and below, which I like. I think that kind of balances out. So it is okay to sort of crop things off in a composition. You just have to kind of be mindful that it's not being cropped off right at the edge of something. So for example, if my leaf were up here instead, and it sort of lined up exactly at the edge, that would create a tension with your eye, and your eye would just kind of go directly to that edge and kind of get stuck there. So that's sort of a thing that we try to avoid when we're thinking about composition. Either we want to crop it off, or we want the breathing room. We want a little bit of space in front of something or above something, just to give your eye a little space and help your eye to continue moving around. So I feel like with this leaf a little lower, and the space down here, my eye doesn't really, I can kind of check and say, does my eye get stuck? If the answer is no, then you can move on to the next step.